Welcome to Interview with a Contrarian. I'm Mark Milkey, president and founder of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy. For those of you that don't know about us, we started about 2 years ago, but received our charitable number this past year, launched in June with a new website and a book, The 1867 Project, which has shot to the top of the charts, hit #1 on July 1st, given it was about Canada. But I'm here today to talk to another author, Roy Ratnavel, who's author of a book also released earlier this year, Prisoner number 1056, How I Survived War and Found Peace. Full disclosure here, Roy is a board member at the Aristotle Foundation, and there's a reason why I invited him, as you'll see in a moment as we begin to discuss his book and his views. But for those of you who want to know more about the Aristotle Foundation, just go to aristotlefoundation.org. But welcome, Roy, and congratulations on the success of your book, Prisoner 1056.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me, and congratulations for the 1867 project. And I'm partway through reading it, and it's very exciting stuff.
Thanks, Roy. And well, it's fun to have two books to talk about, but let's dig into yours. Let's start with the obvious question that I ask everyone at the beginning of an interview. Why did you decide to write a book? This is not normal. And sorry, I should also do a bit of an intro for you, Roy, which is for people who don't know your history. You originally came from Sri Lanka, and you can explain more details when you came to Canada. But when you came to Canada, you started in the mailroom of a financial services company, and you only recently retired. You spent most of your career at CI Financial, making it your way to the corner office, so to speak, as vice president. It's a wonderful success story for an immigrant to Canada, and now a fully patriotic Canadian, as viewers and listeners will find out. But given your history, and you were busy with a financial career, why did you decide to write a book about your experiences and about Canada?
Okay, thanks for the question. So in my mid-30s, so about 20 years ago, or early 30s, I should say, I thought that I should share a story, my story. So it's a memoir. So to give a bit of background to the listeners, I was born in Sri Lanka. And at the age of 17, I was a political prisoner because there was a civil war going on at the time. And then I miraculously survived that experience. At the age of 18, my father at the time decided that there's no opportunity for a minority Tamil boy like me in that country, and decided that Canada might be the land of opportunity and sent me away at the age of 18. So in 1988, April 18th, I landed in Toronto with almost no money in my pocket and not knowing anyone and not really knowing the history of this country, the culture, the nuance, any of that stuff. And slowly made my way out of the shock and horror of war to really finding people here in this country who have given me support, warm welcome, guidance, mentorship. And I went from being in the mailroom to the boardroom, and just recently retired as the vice chairman. But when the COVID happened in 2019, as you know, we all had a bunch of time on our hands. And I thought maybe this is the time to write a book about my experience. And it's not just about saying, an immigrant boy came to Canada and made a bunch of money and, the end. But I wanted to have what I call the third act, which is really to tell people what a wonderful country that we have here called Canada. It's an amazing experiment. And yeah, it has its own colonial past, and people can talk about that. But the reality is no country is perfect. Every country has its blemishes and warts. But fundamentally, this country is very decent. And I wanted to tell the world, tell Canadians to cherish this country. And also, this book really is about that. It's really not about a book of suffering. It's a book of success. And nobody wins alone. This country gave me that opportunity, a fairly level playing field, per se. So I really wanted to pay homage to this country through this book, not only telling my personal story of being terrorized as a teenager and then being transformed in this country because of those amazing values that I experienced, which I call freedom and choice. And in fact, I actually believe those are only two things human beings should be guaranteed: freedom and choice. And the rest is really the choices you make. Good choices you make will lead to good outcomes, and bad choices you make lead to bad outcomes. And that's the price of freedom. And so I'm sort of thinking all this together, and really to highlight the point that I'm just going to say it again is that we have such a wonderful country. And I think we need to, and I personally want to make sure that, when I leave this planet, I leave this place better than I have found it. And this one step of one way of doing it.
You mentioned Canada is a place to be proud of. That's not often a popular thing to say these days. Um, I don't want to promote the 1867 project, but you've started reading it as you mentioned it. You'll know, and we talked about this offline, so to speak. There seems to be a lot of criticism these days of Canada as an entity, as if we should be compared to perfection or some utopia in history. You took a very different tack. In fact, when we first chatted, courtesy of John Kay, who said, you got to talk to Roy Ratnavel, and why I invited you on the board, actually. And we talked about this. When we first chatted, you mentioned that, look, you've encountered people who think or will tell you and assume that because of, you've got a skin color that's not the same as mine, that you would buy into the victim narrative that Canada is an institutionally racist country. What's interesting in the book, and there's lots of interesting aspects to Prisoner 1056, but in one passage, you talk about how you worked in Western Canada. And in fact, you mentioned you spent some time in Kelowna, which is where I was born and raised. And so what struck me about that story was you get this sort of air of condescension from people, not to pick on Toronto, but let's pick on Toronto for a moment, where, some in Toronto look at Western Canada and think it's Hicksville. And you had a very different experience because you made much of your your money, you made much of your living in Western Canada. Can you explain a little bit about what you saw in Western Canada vis-a-vis, say, to be blunt about it, the uninformed views maybe in some parts of the country about Western Canada and, rural Canadians in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so when I came here in '88 and landed in Toronto, and in '98, I thought I should go out west and try to build a life there. And I mean, look, Toronto is multicultural. I see more of my people around. But, my dad was a great inspiration for me. I mean, even though he never left Sri Lanka, he has traveled the world through books, and he's an avid reader. And he used to tell me, look, once you go there, you need to assimilate into the society. And he even said to me, if you want to know what locals do, just go hang out at the bar and you'll see what the locals do. And just because somebody looks like you doesn't mean they have their best interest, your best interest, just because they look like me. So from a small age, I always wanted to mingle with people who didn't look like me. I was endlessly curious about other people and other cultures and other way of thinking. And I thought, if I just stayed in Toronto, I'm just going to hang out with my own community. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm proud of my background and my cultural identity and all that. But how am I going to learn and grow in this country unless I go and experience new experiences? And that's what I thought I should probably get out to the West. And so I ended up in Vancouver, but most of my clients were in the rural areas. So it'll be, Kelowna, Penticton, Prince George, Fort Nelson, Fort St. John, and if you go to Alberta, Medicine Hat and Lethbridge and places like that. And by God, like the experiences I had, the people I encountered, it would have been the best way to explain that is that it's really enriched me and rounded me out in a way that I have different perspective. I can think of things differently than I used to, and it's really galvanized my identity in a way in that I don't look at myself as some brown guy from Sri Lanka. I really think of myself as a Canadian, and it might sound like a cliche, but it is not. And this is what really gave me that deep love for this country. And I mean, these are now my best friends. They live in all parts of Canada, and I know their spouses, I know their kids, they know my wife, and they know my kid. When they come to Toronto, they stay with me. When I go out west, I stay with them. And it really is an amazing place, Western Canada. And I think people, for some reason, especially in the liberal land of Canada, which is central Canada, people somewhat think that these are a bunch of hillbillies out there that would hate anyone who doesn't look like them. It's actually quite the opposite. They're, they're plain spoken. They're very direct. They're honest, and they're very friendly. And they just, I mean, I don't know how else to explain this other than to say I'm just overwhelmed by the friendship that I've built, and I'm still very Western Canada at heart. I just happen to live in Toronto, so don't hold that away against me. Um, but it is, yeah, as you said. I mean, I think there is a because I heard somebody say the other day, "Oh, Alberta is like Texas of Canada," and it's like, I said, "What is wrong with that? What is wrong with Texas?" and so that sentiment is still there, and I think that's, and I do find that Canadians tend to be more provincial in that.
Do you think part of it is Western Canada is still, in some senses, or at least has been, more of a frontier? It's a bit of a cliche too, but nonetheless, or the Pacific Coast, for example, very open to other cultures, historically, given its geographic location. I spent 2 years in Japan, but I remember in the 1980s, before I went to Japan, of course, Vancouver, welcomed immigrants from Hong Kong, and especially again after 1997 and the handover, right? And you're seeing more, Vancouver has been pretty diverse for a very long time in that sense. But Western Canada in general, I mean, I find Central Canada more conservative operationally, if I can put it that way. But really, in terms of entrepreneurial, zest or openness to change, right? When you think about the West, other than Indigenous peoples, it was settled much later than the rest of Canada. It didn't do so in contradistinction to the United States, right, in 1776 and all that, right? We were not settled by fleeing United Empire loyalists. So do you think that plays into it? Where the West in general, I mean, to survive, you had to cooperate with other people, whether they looked like you, had your religion, were Ukrainian, were English, or whatever in Alberta. You don't survive in the West, at least on the prairies in -40, unless you learn to cooperate and think about what it takes to succeed. Is there something to that, the West being more of a frontier culture in that sense?
Yeah, I think that I find Western Canada, the lot more risk takers that I come across in that part of the world than people in, say, Toronto. And I think you're right. I think that the frontier mentality is still, alive and well in Western part of the country, and also it has more rooted in religion as well. I think I find people in Western Canada to be more religious than people in Central Canada. Um, I think sometimes believing in a higher power can give you certain discipline in life. And I'm not saying anyone who isn't religious is not a good person. In fact, I don't consider myself deeply religious, but I do respect and people's, religious beliefs in that sense. I think regardless of the religion, I think it gives people an outlet, a sense of community. And I think those values are kind of sadly eroding away in many parts of Western world, actually, I should say. And we see these kind of things. And I mean, you and I spoke off air many times about some of the things we see, and we have very similar views. The funny thing is, I didn't even know you existed. You didn't know I existed just a year ago. We got introduced by a mutual friend of ours. I have more in common with you than I have in common with my own family, like my brother or my cousins or things like that. And that's my point. It's like, just because somebody looks like you doesn't mean they think like you. And this notion that we all need to kind of segregate ourselves from our, these identities that we have today, the person of color and whatever the labels that we want to put on people. And somehow that's how we should run our lives. And to me, that's so ridiculous and laughable, because I really don't have a lot in common with a lot of people that I come across who look like me. That's not to say that I'm making a kind of a bold statement. It's that if somebody looks like me and they think like me, act like me, then I'm certainly be friends with them too. But it's just this, especially in this part of the country, everything is so based on how you look, and so to me, that's why I wrote the book as well because I was so tired of, having this label put on. And the fact is that because I look like I look, I must be then should be voting the same way that somebody else who looks like me does. And to me, those things are so ridiculous and insulting, quite frankly, because I can think for myself and I can decide on who I want to support, which party I want to support.
You also have a
And
very personal reason, though, right? Going back to Sri Lanka and before you emigrated to Canada, right? There's a reason why, if I can, paraphrase for you or put words in your mouth for a moment. I mean, you just like identity politics, and it has to do with how your identity was treated in Sri Lanka. Am I right?
right. Yes, I mean,
Explain a little
I
bit
think
what happened there.
yeah, basically it was a war between two ethnic groups, and I think one of the warning signs of this is what I see today. I mean, this is how these things get started. I mean, I cannot. I mean, I said this in the book, and you read the book. It's like we had a thing called standardization, which was basically um, said that if you're a Tamil kid, you need to score higher marks to get into university. And if you're somebody non-Tamil, then you need to get lower marks. It's just a way of artificially equating the outcome as opposed to equating the input, right? So it's equality versus equity. And I'm not a fan of equity. I'm a fan of equality. I don't think we'll ever have a perfectly equal opportunity for everybody. And I think we did find out ways to fix that part, certainly. But the outcome is what they were trying to uh, make it even. And
They wanted equal outcomes as opposed to equal opportunity.
correct. And so that led to, many Tamil young men and women not being able to get education, get jobs. So when you have a whole bunch of young people with nothing to do, that creates war. And so I see these kind of signs in Western world today. Freedom of speech is the other one that I bang my drum against, and you and I spoke about it numerous occasions. I see the erosion of freedom of speech. It's very concerning to me, especially to someone like me who lived in a country that was authoritarian and controlled speech. And it is so easy to denounce freedom, very hard to acquire it. Believe me, I had lived in a country that it was horrible. There was no, they say there's freedom of speech, but there was no freedom after speech. And I've said this, freedom of speech is a non-negotiable Western value, and we all need to die on this hill. It is core to Western civilization and to identity. And what I see now is these Western values are being sacrificed at the altar of political correctness, which is troubling to me. And this is one of the reasons I sort of, if you look at the book, it has 12 chapters, and the last 2 or 3 is my third act, which I kind of talked about this aspect of it. And I got chastised for it by some people for saying the things I said.
How did they justify their positions? Because you're right, in Prisoner 1056, you talk about this in the last couple of chapters of the book, again, relative to your own experiences being tortured for being a Tamil, right? And
right.
In Sri Lanka. And so it's natural you look at identity politics. I mean, what you're speaking to, Roy, is the beauty of attaching yourself to an idea as opposed to an ethnicity, right? You can change
right.
your ideas. You can be in support of laudable ideas and disdain lousy ones. And none of that is connected to skin color, ethnicity, or where you were born. But how do the people who were critical of those 2 chapters in Prisoner 1056, how do they justify their position? I mean, you had a successful career, a successful life in Canada, right, over 3.5 decades now. How do they justify their position by dividing people into race and ethnicity, which has been the norm in human history? Whereas, you're right, in Canada and other, Anglosphere countries anyway, it's we progressed, or we're progressing towards valuing the individual and not their collective, based on color and the rest of it. How do they justify kind of going back? Or do they even realize they're doing that they're becoming tribal again about ethnicities and race and the rest of it? Do they even conceive of that, your critics?
Yeah, I think this notion that if you're a person of color and therefore you must belong to a certain category of people who needs to think a certain way. So I cannot ever say, oh, if I said Canada is a great country, give me an opportunity. Believe me, many immigrants like myself believe this. And this sort of group that doesn't exist out there, but there are people who think that if you're a person of color and you're for these values, which I just espoused to you, then I have sold out to the system.
You're a coconut, as you say in the book.
Right, exactly. I'm a coconut, brown on the outside and white on the inside. But if I am suffering in life right now, then that very system is oppressing me. So it's just one of those, the weird world that we live in now, where people think disparity immediately means discrimination, and victims are always right, and if somebody's a victor or successful, then if that person must be doing something wrong. If there's a room full of people and one guy with $10 and the other guy with $100, then the guy with $100 did something wrong to the guy with the $10 to be able to have the $100. This weird math is, to me, is shocking.
Do you think it's also, Roy, do you think it's also they just don't understand how economies grow or are built? I mean, when I think back, Canada's a nation of immigrants, even if you go back
Correct.
20,000 years ago to the first indigenous settlers, as we'd call
Right.
them now, across the Bering Strait. Do you think sometimes the critics, the identity politics types, those who think Canada is institutionally racist, as opposed to meeting the occasional bigot out there, do you think they just fundamentally also don't understand finance and the economy? I mean, you built a living going out there, using shoe leather, so to speak, the cliche, finding your clients, building a business, as
Right.
have others. The first French fur traders 500 years ago, sending pelts to France.
Right.
They built something out of nothing, working with indigenous peoples of the same era to do that. And so, economies are built for the most part, unless you're in a Spanish or Portuguese, imperialist taking gold from, some safe,
Right.
economies are built, including even in colonial eras, right? So is that what people don't grasp, is literally how economies work? You contributed to the country, as has every other immigrant, for the last 20,000 years.
Right.
And there wasn't some pot of gold that you came to and stole from someone else. You created your own opportunities. Obviously, the system, the rule of law, free enterprise to the extent it exists, to the degree it does, helped all of that. But it's
Right.
not, and you had some skills, but nonetheless, you didn't steal from someone else's pot of
No.
gold, so to speak. So are your critics simply not grasping what economies are like?
Yeah, I think the look, I came to Canada with almost no money, and I'm not unique in this. There are many people like me who have done that. I worked hard, built a life against all odds, and raised a kid with focus on education and achievement. That's how you get ahead in life, not by wallowing in the past grievances and victimhood, because victimhood isn't a virtue. The world will never be perfectly fair, and that throughout life, one will hit hurdles and experience hardship. I mean, I went bankrupt at the age of early 30s, and then I learned from that experience and never to repeat that mistake again. And I came here and I spoke a little bit of English, had a very thick accent, um, had no confidence. I basically took every opportunity that came my way in the last 3 decades uh, that I lived in this incredible country, and I took every opportunity, and the advice and the warmth and encouragement of the people whose paths I have crossed. Both would have astonished my father, even in his most optimistic moment, to be honest. And I went from a mailroom boy to just recently retired as the vice chairman of the largest independent asset management company in Canada that manages over $400 billion. And and I had to fight for every opportunity in the company. Nobody gave it to me because I look like this. And I believe in meritocracy. I truly, truly believe that has to be a focus of society, to build meritocracy again, because we're losing that. And I said this one time in a conversation, and I got chastised for it by the audience. And I said, look, we should have to build a society based on merit, and we shouldn't be lowering the bar, but we should be lowering the barrier. So getting people opportunity, finding ways to get kids better education. Um, and they said, no, you got to lower the bar. And so, look, nobody lowered the bar for me. I had to compete, maybe work harder than the guy next to me to get noticed. And look, life needs to have a little bit of luck, and you meet some people that are going to give you a leg up sometimes. But
you had some mentors. Yeah.
Yeah, luck alone is going to get you here. You have to really leverage the luck that comes your way. And I look back at my 35 years in this country, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
What do you think
And
has changed in that, by the way, in 35 years now? How did we get to this position where, I mean, if anything, you would think Canada was more racist 35 years ago, and yet we have people today in 2020.
I know. I mean, look, I met racist people in this country. I meet racist people outside this country. It's to say that racism only goes one way is ridiculous to me. Like somehow, if you're a person of color and you could never be a racist. I mean, Jesus, you should only listen to the conversation in our community about what they say about other race in our community. But my issue is that, you read the book. There's encounters I had with individuals who are somewhat racist, but there are no laws that currently exist in Canadian law book that is racist in intent. And if it is, then we should all get together and fight that thing down. And I'm for that, because that's the only thing that's consistent with our democratic ideals. But I don't see anywhere that I went to in this country where I was treated because I looked the way I look, or I pray to a different God or something. In fact, if you looked at our company when I left, it looks like UN. It's really is. This is even before it's fashionable to have DEI. It's naturally happened, and that's the way it should be. And in fact, one of the reason, like I had to sort of eventually retire the business, is I was getting tired of all those ESGs and DEI mandates, and it's just the world has changed, and I think it is because we keep electing people who are not leaders. Leadership isn't doing what's popular, and if you look at today, most leaders, political leaders, will do what Twitter says. If the Twitter wind goes this way, they want to follow that. We lost that. I mean, there was a time we had leaders, and they said things that not popular, but it's the right thing to do. And so if I were to put finger on something, is that this notion that everybody is a victim and the government's going to take care of you. And so what we need to do then is every story need to have a villain and a hero. And the villain here today it's not really person of a Caucasian male. It's really anyone who's successful economically. So if you are successful economically, you must have done something wrong to the people who doesn't have it, and therefore you must be punished. I mean, I was listening to Olivia Chow during her mayoral run, and I was in that category of person who has done something wrong to people who doesn't have it. Therefore, I must be taxed. I live in a nice home. There must be taxed. I drive a nice car. I must be taxed. And look, nobody's saying we don't want to pay taxes, but this vitriol towards anyone who is economically successful because they bust their back, did things. I mean, I talked to my wife about this. I mean, I never took a holiday. I worked every day. I didn't travel. I saved. I invested. Now I have the means to do what I do. But I had to make some sacrifices early on in my life to be able to enjoy, in my mid-50s, the fruits of my labor. And all of a sudden, now I am a bad guy. And
sounds like so the politics of envy seem to have combined the politics of identity politics, where now they both morphed into this nasty combination where it's directed again at I guess people with my skin color or whatever. But it's fascinating to me that people don't grasp history. I mean, New York, for example, was very diverse in the sense we mean it these days, long before any other city in the world, perhaps, or London before that. right? Imperial London. I read
Right.
some book a couple of years ago, biography of Mahatma Gandhi, and in fact, there was a comment about a Tamil. A Tamil had a very positive view of London, and I thought of you recently when I reread that passage. But London and New York were diverse. Why? Because they were centers of opportunity, of
Right.
commerce, of finance. And back when Toronto was pretty, pale-faced in general, and Presbyterian and Anglican, and that was pretty much it, going back 50 or 100 years.
Right.
New York was already diverse, and it seems to me Canadians sometimes don't get out of their petri dish and grasp what was already happening around the rest of the world and what led to opportunity in places like New York City. So I find it ironic that sometimes, again, people worship Toronto as a diverse cosmopolitan capital when London and New York were there first, or Singapore, more recently in the past century. That sort
Right.
of thing, or always has been diverse. Is that part of it? Canadians, gaze at their own navel a little bit too often.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, look, I don't know that this answers the question, but I would say that my grandparents lived in a country where they were colonial subjects of Great Britain. Then after independence in 1948, my parents and I lived under an unfair system and were ruled by an authoritarian regime which trampled on our freedoms every day for decades. Um, so, my view is that in life, you don't get ahead by driving with your eyes on the rearview mirror. Uh, you can never improve yourself by doing battles with the past moral failings of society. Uh, to that end, a person needs to really concentrate their efforts on struggling with oneself, not the society around them, because circumstances will make you a victim. That happens to people in life, it happened to me. But choices make you remain as one. I mean, I could have simply said, somebody tortured me at the age of 17, so I was a victim. I came here, my early 20s to mid 20s was wasted by me carrying around, thinking about how I'm a victim. I looked at everything through that lens. Therefore, Mark has to be nice to me because I'm the victim. And that never yielded a good outcome for me, And I remember my father used to say, there are two types of problems in the world, yours and everybody else's. You have to fix yours. And the other one he used to say is that if you ask for sympathy, you will get a lot of it. But sympathy never solved an issue.
Hmm.
So I really had to change and evolve in the way I thought about myself instead of blaming Sri Lanka for, I mean, sure, there's enough blame can go around, but that's not your fault, Mark, or anyone who's here. So I had to kind of get out of that mindset and say, hey, I'm going to rebrand myself. I'm going to rethink about how I want to conduct myself. And I started taking responsibility for all my actions. And so that basically was the turning point in my life around mid 20 to say, hey, past events cannot be changed, but they can serve as a lesson for the future that I need to want to have, which was really to say, I need to make good choices. And I still make mistakes, don't get me wrong. That will always be a learning curve for life for everybody, but I make less of them. And I had massive PTSD from the torture and the war. And I kind of use as a crutch for all my reaction to everything that I face. And I can just simply say, oh, I can't help myself because I have PTSD, I still have PTSD. I just learn how to deal with it. And so, as much as it's going to sound kind of tough, but the message is this: look, nobody cares about your problems at the end of the day. You got to fix your own issues. Sure, there'll be government, there'll be society that can lend you a hand and give you an opportunity. But as long as you are given freedom and choice, which is the only two things you should be guaranteed, the rest is up to you. You'll be rewarded for the good choices you make, and you'll be punished for the bad ones. That's the price of freedom. And I was punished for the bad choices I made earlier on in my life here in Canada, and I was rewarded plenty for the good choices I made. And so coming back to your question, and I don't know where we are going here, and I really, and every time there's a global conflict of some sort, whether it's Middle East or whether it's the George Floyd incident during COVID, or whether it's COVID itself, everything is so politicized and everybody has an opinion. And most of them are ill-informed, comes through TikTok or whatever. And fast forward to 2023, here we are today. And it frightens me to think that, we have people who hate this country, who live here, which is ironic to me. And I always kind of say, Canada is so great, even people who hate the country don't want to leave, right? And I am so proud to be able to say that I'm a Tamil by heritage, and I've said this before. I'm an accidental Sri Lankan by birth, a proud Canadian by choice, and an unapologetic Tamil by my heritage. That's my heritage. But I'm a Canadian first, and I am going to raise my son in the exact manner. He's going to be proud of his background as a Tamil, but he's going to be even more prouder as Canadian. And I'm going to tell him that his responsibility is to leave this country better than he has found it. And just hating this country and pointing to the past mistakes. Sure, we should go and fix them, do our best to make reconciliation with these type of acts of the past. But look, human stories are horror show, right? I mean, somebody did something horrible to somebody else, and that's just the way this one goes. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fix those issues. And Canada is doing its best to fix those issues. But this, blanket statement that Canada is a genocidal nation, and to me, it's like, you want to see genocidal nation? Come to Sri Lanka. I'll show you. I could clearly leave here after this interview and not worry about being a Tamil, or somebody's going to come after me because I am a Tamil. I could probably get taken out by a car because of somebody mad driver, but it's never going to be that case. So it's exaggeration. Like it's just like when Jagmeet Singh said that, that lunatic who drove this car into the Muslim family and killed them, which was a horrible act. Jagmeet Singh basically made a statement, that declaration, saying that people of color cannot leave the homes now because there are people out to kill them. So I had to call their office and say, hey, can you tell Jagmeet that I need to know when I can leave the house? Because this whole hyperbole, it to me is like, I think it's an SNL skit sometime. It's a joke. And sure, there are, idiots out there say dumb things. And, by and large, it doesn't, if you're a minority anywhere in the world, Mark, if you go to the country I'm from, I'm sure you're going to get some funny comments from somebody. And so it doesn't matter, when you're a minority anywhere in the world, you're going to meet rude people and idiots. But that doesn't fundamentally stop you from doing great things and achieving great things, as long as there's fairly level playing field, which is what Canada has provided me. And I will continue to say it. I'll say it loud and proud, and I'm going to do all my best I can to leave this country, as I said in the outset, better than I have found it.
That's a wonderful place to almost end, Roy. But look, you're onto something. You're onto more than something. So, Prisoner 1056: How I Survived War and Found Peace by Roy Ratnavel, former, just recently retired executive with CI Financial. Let's end off with this, Roy, because I think, again, you're more than onto something, and your book is a wonderful testimony to, again, the potential, and what Canada has been for you and others. And I do find, actually, newer Canadians, if I can put it that way, are often the most celebratory of Canada, because they've come from somewhere else. They've come from Sudan, or they've just escaped from Ukraine and the war there, or they don't want to live under the repressive regime of, Xi in China, especially those who came from Hong Kong earlier and then to Canada, and so on and so forth. So ironically, I find old stock Canadians don't seem to grasp what they've got and what they're losing, whereas newer Canadians are like, what are you talking? You're right. What are you talking about? Genocide. Some people may have come from a very genocidal country, or their grandparents survived Ukraine in the 1930s, right, which was genocidal, and so on and so forth. Or Jewish people, who survived the Holocaust. But let's end on a more positive note, because you deal with these issues, I think, very well in Prisoner 1056, and express again why you think Canada should be celebrated or cherished. Who was the greatest influence into your life? Because you've had many mentors, but you've mentioned your dad several times. It seems like more than anyone else. Your father was integral to who you became, just like you are for your son now. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, my father was a great inspiration to me because he gave me the the love for the English language. And he grew up in the British system, so he was well read. Shakespeare, Bernard Shaw, William Blake. You know, so all those great writers, great thinkers, even some of the Eastern philosophers like Rabindranath Tagore, Bengali poet, and so I lived in a very rich environment when it came to that kind of stuff. And in fact, I heard about Churchill. He was a big fan of Churchill, and he would share those stories. Benjamin Disraeli, the first Jewish prime minister of Britain, and so I had that. But he also instilled a lot of values in me. Hard work wins. There's dignity in hard work, and take responsibility for your actions. And those things it's part of my DNA. It's deep in my bone marrow. So when I came here 2 days after I landed, he was killed in Sri Lanka, and that absolutely devastated me. So when he died, on an untimely and unjust death, left me with the feeling that I had to live for two people. I thought if I did well enough in life, somehow I could give the life that he always should have had. So as I was contemplating my next move in Canada, and I was in this mailroom, and I ran into a young executive. Name is Bill Holland. He's about 10 years older than me. Took a shine to me. This immigrant, skinny little kid, like can't even talk because has no confidence. He just took me under his wings and really gave me confidence, taught me the business, and taught me how to. I always say he made a man out of a boy, and he's still my mentor 30 plus years later. And I meet him at least a couple of times a month for a coffee or a drink or a bite to eat. And he's the chairman of the board. We worked very closely to build this company. And then I met, many other people. Bob McRae, he was a WW2 veteran, and Del Budd, who did 161 mission from at the age of 20 from India to Burma during the World War II in the Pacific Theater, gets shot at. And I saw these people, and Raymond Chang, who was another great Canadian. There's a building named after him in the former Ryerson School. Now it's Toronto Metropolitan University. These are my mentors. Their names are inscribed in hospital wings and university buildings. And they taught me a lot of values, one of which is show empathy to other people, treat them with respect, help people out. And when you have money and time, donate it back. And so my mentors are plenty, and they're all from different parts of the world, different skin tones. And for once, I never was ill-treated by them. If anything, they were tough on me because they wanted to get the best out of me. Sometimes I jokingly say that I'm still a little nervous around Bill Holland, even though I've known him for 35 years. It's a healthy respect. It's almost like I treat him like my dad, even though he's a lot younger than my father. So those people have really built this new Roy Ratnavel, and that's why even when I say it, some people say, well, you're lucky. I'm like, okay, that's easy to say. It's like, oh, you're anecdotal evidence. I'm like, oh, I always said that, first you got to fix yourself. If you fix yourself, then you can fix your household. If you fix your household, then a bunch of these small collective households can create a community that is strong. The community creates a nice society, and nice societies create great countries. And it's always bottom up. It's never top down. And I think there are plenty of amazing people in this country, and I have witnessed it. I've come across them. I mentioned some names in the book, so if you're reading it, you'll see it. And don't believe this hype about Canada as a horrible place and genocidal nation. If anything, there should be more Canadas in the world, and the world will be better off for it.
I think that's a brilliant place to end. So thank you, Roy, author of Prisoner 1056, How I Found War and Peace, and it shot to the top of the Globe and Mail bestseller list and other bestseller lists this past year. Make sure you pick it up at fine bookstores near you or online, wherever you can find it. Thank you, Roy. And this has been Interviews with a Contrarian. I'm Mark Milkey, president of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy.
Thank you.